I think the biggest thing we wanted to talk to you about was the annual college football viewer survey that you do. It obviously generated quite a few headlines last year with the little shout out you guys got from Pat McAfee based on his approval rating. Just to go back to that. So Pat McAfee's approval rating last year on College Game Day, according to those you surveyed, was at 30.1%. So not very high. And then this year, though, it climbed to 37.7%. So it seems like the tides are starting to shift when it comes to the perception of Pat McAfee on game day. What say you?
I think so. I think people are really warming up to him. I think doing different things on the show, like the kicking segment, even the people who don't like him seem to like the kicking segment that they do and the money to students or charity or what have you. But yeah, I this isn't a scientific survey. We're not paying a pollster to do one of the kind. We're just surveying our readers. We got about 3,100 responses, 3,700 this year, and the people who like McAfee on game day went up, and the people who don't like him went down. So it's basically an even split at this point, along with the people who just kind of selected no opinion. And he got very upset about it last year. That was also at a time when there was a lot of backlash toward him for things he said about Washington State and just a few other things that had been going on around game day. And so, he openly spoke about being unsure if he was going to return to game day and kind of waited on that for a while. He ultimately did, which I think we all expected him to. And look, the show's got record ratings for the last 2 years, and it's probably going to do so again. I think it's pretty clear it's working. There's just, as with everything with McAfee, some people really like him and some people really don't. And you kind of live with that. Personally, I mostly like him on the show.
What was that like wild to you when he responded to the survey last year? Because I think, we all write things and especially at Awful Announcing, we'll write things and people will respond. And there's always kind of that like quick, like, trigger in your gut or whatever, like, oh my God, like this really got to this person. And for Pat, it was like, I don't know if I want to continue doing game day based on the results of this survey, it seemed like.
Yeah, I think what I've learned and a lot of us have learned from him is that he does read a lot of stuff on social media. He reads a lot of stuff that is written about him. I know he's called you guys out many times over for things that you guys pull from the show. So he is very sensitive to that, I think. And I do think the backlash on the college game day stuff was maybe bigger than other forums because it's an institution, because it's been there for so long, because we know college football fans can be very upset if you slight them in any which way, if you don't appreciate a certain tradition, which is what happened. So yeah, I was surprised that he would say that. Like I said, the show was doing well. He seemed to be having fun. I never thought he wouldn't come back. Did he use that for leverage or something? I don't know, but he didn't really announce it until I think the summer, I think, is when he kind of fully signed that he was going to come back. So, yeah, that was surprised. I don't think he's mentioned anything about it this year, about the numbers going up. I did get a like on Blue Sky from his account of the survey. So someone has at least seen it, I guess.
Wow, Pat's one of the people leaving Twitter. Who would have thought?
I don't know whether him or whoever runs the account or something like that. Yeah.
For sure. Boston Connor.
Yeah, probably. I would be curious, Chris, and actually Ben too, like, what do you feel like how has he gotten better on the show? Like, what do you feel like he gets about that show's audience, and just why do we think that this is working better? Not just him maybe being less sensitive to the results or anything, but yes, the kicking segment, sure. But I feel like he seems to be more in tune with this audience than he was last year. There's not quite that give and take that there was week by week in year one.
I think it's pretty clear. One of the things he loves doing is the local chants of whatever that school is, the fight song, a song, whatever. He's great in front of a crowd, in front of a live crowd. But personally, like I've watched him on WWE and Game Day and a lot of these other things. I think the thing that he does that I don't like the most or like the least is his actual daily show when they're just kind of in the studio there. When you get him out in front of a crowd, he's fantastic. He knows how to feed off a crowd, how to lean into a crowd. James Madison last year, I think, with the basketball shot. He was at West Virginia this year. Like, whenever he goes to these college towns, he knows how to get people like excited and get the energy up. And that show needed energy. Like, it really had been lacking for a while. And he's brought up the energy of everybody. I mean, Ben, you know this. Michael Cole at WWE has said Pat McAfee kind of reinvigorated his own career, calling games with him. I think the same is true for Kirk Herbstreit. I think ever since McAfee got there, Herbstreit's energy is up and they feed off each other well. And it's really worked. So that's why I think he's been a real positive for the show. And I think he knows to kind of lean into the individuality of a place and give the fans what they want, as opposed to complaining about the flag or something like that.
Yeah, I know that one of our clips that went the most viral or got the most views, however you want to frame it, is a clip from last year where he just started "We don't give a damn about the whole state of Michigan" chant while in Columbus, and it's just like it was very WWE. It felt like a WWE performer, which Pat ultimately is. And I think you make a good point about Herbstreit and the chemistry there. I also think the addition of Nick Saban has given you a real kind of yin and yang when it comes to, you have this kind of straight-laced guy in his 70s, and then you have this 37-year-old man-child. I say that lovingly. And it's but they also have admiration for each other and respect for each other. And I think it's helped kind of ease Nick into the game day experience. And he seemed, I mean, based on your poll, he had, I think, an 80% approval rating.
Yeah, like 79, 80% people are liking Nick Saban, which is not a surprise. I think everybody really seems to like it.
Yeah, but I mean, he's taken to this game day experience as quickly as anyone I can recall. And I do think that the chemistry with Pat has played a role in that to some degree. I think
I wanted to chime in on Saban. So
yeah,
to me, not a surprise. Genius, legend, name recognition, 105%, of course. Like a lot of reasons that it made the utmost sense when they hired him are all kind of coming true. But like when I hear Chris talk about the energy of the show, he could have sucked it backward, right? Like this is a guy, if you watch the thing that I think established the chemistry between Pat and Nick was these paid, as we found out, appearances last year where Saban would just be kind of in his basement. Those were not lively. Those would not have indicated to you that Nick Saban was about to come on College Game Day and kind of, in a way, the best way that a dude his age can and his temperament can, like match Pat's energy in some of these segments. It's actually like, I wonder what the world looks like where Pat maybe because of, I mean this as a joke, because of Chris's survey, quits game day last year and doesn't do this, and they hire Saban anyway. That probably doesn't work. Like, I think we're looking at a world where it's, I don't know, 50% support for Saban. And it's just, if you're an Alabama fan or you just are an old dude who likes to hear his thoughts on the game, you like him, but maybe the younger crowd hates it or something. Like, those two together feels like they've really struck gold to take them into kind of the next generation. Or the next,
and he's gotten better, and he's gotten better week to week. I think it's the same thing you're seeing with Belichick. Like these coaches who were just in their silos for decades, and they get out of it. And at first they're a little unsure because it's new territory. But when you're on that set week after week after week, and you've got McAfee next to you, you can't. I'm sure he can't help but let loose a little bit. They're bringing his wife on the show to be one of the guest pickers and doing a lot of stuff. And so a lot of these coaches, you just kind of weren't familiar with this world. It took a little bit to adjust. And I think Saban's really opened up. Yeah, because of McAfee. If he wasn't there, I don't know. Like, is Desmond Howard the guy who brings the energy then at that time? It would have been an interesting dynamic. It is a very crowded set, but I think everybody likes the McAfee Saban dynamic. Like, that's a good thing.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And it's interesting. Like, we're so used to Nick Saban dominating. Now we seem to get like a daily dose of humility with him, whether it's Miss Terry out picking him when it comes to her game day picks or Livy Dunn shading him over his comments about Vanderbilt. Like there's just a lot of fun dynamics there that paint Nick Saban in a light that we haven't previously seen. I wanted to go though. If Pat McAfee was like the big headline from last year's survey, he's probably his rise is probably the big headline from this year's survey too. But I think the other, maybe the subhead would be Big Noon and Big Noon Kickoff. And looking at the comparison year over year, just based on your survey, last year, Big Noon Kickoff. Well, you ask readers, do you watch College Game Day or Big Noon Kickoff? Last year, it was 77% Game Day, 23% Big Noon Kickoff. This year, 84.7% Game Day, 15.3% Big Noon Kickoff. I think we're seeing a lot of negative headlines, even on our site, about Big Noon Kickoff and a lot of the fans' reactions to them kind of having a monopoly on Ohio State games, or taking the whiteout possibility away from Ohio State versus Penn State a few weeks ago. I think just kind of a general, I don't know, it almost seems like a dissatisfaction. What do you make of kind of the state of Big Noon Kickoff at this point in its tenure?
Yeah, so this is the third year I did the survey. The numbers this year are about what they were 2 years ago, so it kind of dipped and then went back. So the thing, I think the big picture thing with Big Noon Kickoff is it's presented as another kind of college game day, but it's really not. It's really a promotional vehicle for your Big 10 or your Big 12 games. Like, that's where they're going. As opposed to College Game Day, which doesn't have the Big 10. They've done a lot of Big 10 games this year. They went to Indiana. That was a Big 10 network game. In College Game Day was there. And so college, we wondered when Big 10 went away from College Game Day, would ESPN focus on the Big 10 less or not? And clearly that has not happened, at least especially with the College Game Day side of things. With Fox and Big Noon, when the college football playoff was going through its media rights negotiations over the last couple of years, Kevin Warren, the former Big Ten commissioner, was a big proponent of, let's get multiple networks in here. Let's have them bid against each other, do it like the NFL, and that will drive the price up. It will create just better things for everybody. And there was a lot of people who agreed with him on that. But ultimately, the playoff didn't get the bids I think it expected from a lot of those other parties. And it ends up re-upping with ESPN for 2026 and beyond. It's going to remain just on ESPN. And I always think back to the Big Ten Championship game a couple years ago when Alabama was jockeying to get in the field, and Fox had Nick Saban on at halftime, I believe, of that Big Ten Championship game. And that was so interesting to me. And I thought of that moment, hey, this is Fox getting ready to broadcast the playoff, and they're going to be more than the Big Ten, Pac-12, Big 12 type of thing. Maybe they are going to try to go national, truly national with everything. And they ultimately didn't. They didn't get the playoff, and Big Noon is not going to games that are not Big 10, Big 12 games. So I think it's just kind of is what it is at this point. And the ratings can be up and down and whatever. The larger conversation of games at noon, which is what Penn State and Ohio State fans have been dealing with, that's a whole separate issue. But in terms of the show itself, I think at this point, everybody kind of knows it's a promotional vehicle for one of these conferences, and that's okay. That's the role of the show.
Yeah, I've got a comparison for you. There was a few years ago where probably 2019, 2020, WWE's creative was in the toilet, right? And they left this opening, this void in the wrestling industry for fans who wanted a better product. And along comes AEW, and it seemed like there was a real opening there for AEW. Lo and behold, WWE gets back on track for a variety of reasons. And instead of looking at AEW as competition to WWE, I think now it's kind of cemented as a viable alternative. And I think it's kind of the same for Big Noon, where you mentioned, Game Day was lacking energy. And I think there was a general dissatisfaction for the College Game Day experience. And they hadn't really figured out, the Corso thing, and McAfee was maybe there, but not quite working yet. And then all it took was Game Day to get back on track. And now, and it seemed like there was an opening for Big Noon, right? It seemed like, hey, we kind of like Urban Meyer on TV. This show has a different energy. It's a little more fun, a little livelier. Now that College Game Day's gotten back on track, I think you're right. Like, we kind of have to just change the paradigm in which we view Big Noon, because Big Noon isn't going to replace College Game Day. It's just an alternative to it. What
I think the biggest, it's higher than SEC Nation, the SEC Network show, but it's not College Game Day at this point. It's in between the two. It's the bigger production, but it's also more. It's only going to go to the games where it has the rights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you're going to Ohio State Marshall in September, like, you're kind of giving the game away at that point, right?
There was a stretch last year where the Big Noon was like at Michigan, like 5 straight weeks or 5 out of 6.
Yeah.
It was Colorado games the first like 3 out of 4. There's not a lot of variety in the location. And I think when you go to the same place over and over, it just devalues the show to the viewers. Like, we want to see you guys at new places and new scenes. If it's the same thing every time, it's not as interesting as a television product.
Right. I mean, we know that Game Day is going to be at the biggest game each week. And I think to this point in the season, there's only been 2 games where they've been at the same place, and it was Michigan, Texas, and Ohio State, Penn State.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about a different thing and get both of your guys' takes on it, which is something that's been getting chatter for sure across the landscape and was kind of homed in on in the survey, which is ESPN taking over the SEC. There was a quote, I think, from one of the respondents in the article. ESPN just doesn't have as high quality of a production. CBS was so narrowly focused on the SEC that everything, the analysis, background info, even the camera shots were all top notch. I hate that they didn't renew. Were you surprised to see that level of pushback, Chris? And I guess how much of it do you think is the fact that it's just a new thing and people are still getting used to it? And maybe next year we're talking about, and this year ESPN's broadcast of the SEC is one of the big risers in this whole thing, just because people come to expect it.
I think the thing was the SEC on CBS was so much its own thing. It was the only real game CBS was doing. It was always a big game because it's the SEC. When you and they put the effort into that, you had Vern Lundquist. There was an aura to that. You move over to ABC, ESPN, and it's kind of like every other game. Now they do have their own special graphics package, and ESPN, ABC have tried to make it feel different than everything else on ESPN. There's the graphics package, they got the logo, they've got the song that they brought back. So like they've tried, but the problem is ESPN has every SEC game. And so ultimately it kind of, I think, gets a little, I don't think the SEC on ABC 330 feels like a special thing at this point, because you might have a bigger SEC game at night also on the ESPN networks. That's the game that gets Chris Fowler or something like that. So I think it's more just the nature of it being all in the same place. There was nothing like the SEC on CBS for good reason. It was a very good deal for CBS, and the SEC realized they eventually needed to do something more. So I think that's what's lost. It's not consistent. It doesn't feel like the thing to watch every week. I think that's the biggest thing.